Hey everybody, Game Master here, aka True OGM. This is my first video here on YouTube, and I am a recent convert to the game making in RPG Maker. Started off with RPG Maker MV, and I have to say it is awesome. About a week into it, I've been more than a week into it now, but after I was into it about a week, I realized just how versatile the system is. It's got its drawbacks and its setbacks, definitely, but a lot of that is solved with, your plugins and your scripts. But on its own, it's still got a very powerful system that you can use. So my goal that I decided was that I wanted to use this system to make a Western style RPG. Now, before we get into a lot of what I'm doing, I want to kind of have a brief introduction for those of you that might not know what a Western style RPG is as opposed to an Eastern style RPG. So, a Western style RPG, an Eastern style RPG is your typical console games: Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, the Mana series, Pokemon, the level up, monster grinding. Sometimes you choose a class. Typically, the storyline is pretty linear. It's pretty structured, and like I said, it's on consoles. Western RPGs tend to allow you to customize characters and are more open sandbox in their gameplay and tend to be on computers. Now, there is a lot of mixing of those between the two systems. Like some Eastern RPGs, like for example Final Fantasy 11 and 14 can be played on computers, and from what I understand, Final Fantasy 15 is more of an open sandbox type of game. And for example, BioShock, which is a Western RPG-ish type game, is very, very linear for a purpose, and so there is some mix and match. However, I think that TV tropes can basically explain the difference best. So the Western RPG, it says, is aimed to satisfy the player's need for self-expression and fantasy fulfillment by allowing them to become something that they can never be in real life. The Eastern RPG is aimed to satisfy the player's need for a well-crafted interactive story with interesting characters and complex interactions. So there you go. The Eastern style RPG is aimed more at storyline as opposed to character development, so to speak, actual what you might call role playing. You're sort of playing in a book, sort of. And Western style RPG is actually really kind of more of a computerized version of your pen and paper Dungeons and Dragons type of RPG. So having said that, I have started creating a game, and as you can see, it's going to be a Western genre because, Western style RPG, Western genre, but also because there's not very many Western games, let alone Western RPGs, and the Western games out there tend to be pretty good, so I'm going to give this a try. It's a tile set that I found that was originally made for XV that I sort of converted to MV with the help of some graphics programs. So the way this is done is everything, my parameters from hit points to my stats. So normally when you do this in your classes, you make the classes and you have all this right here in there for you. So everything that I have, hit points, and then I have new stats instead of those. There's not like magic attack. It tends to be more like, the Fallout games or the Dungeons and Dragons or Neverwinter Nights and Knights of the Old Republic Star Wars games have those typical kind of stats. And those are the Western style RPGs, are the ones that are more like Dungeons and Dragons and Fallout and Mass Effect. So those stats are all going to be variables instead of using what the system has. The reason is because I think it's a lot easier that way to do event-based leveling. So the experience and the level are also variables, so that I can grant experience based upon completing a mission as opposed to monster grinding like the Eastern style RPGs. And also this allows me to create events that will allow a sneak skill as well as some on the map battling, which I believe I've worked out most of the kinks of that, and we'll get into those. I think those are going to be maybe the main contributions I have, is how to do those two things, because I know that those are things that are in high demand and there's not a lot of information out there. So, well, and the sneak skill is very good because you can also use it for a rogue game, on-screen battle, maybe if you want to do more of an adventure game. And then also I have opposed skill rolls, using random rolls and adding parameters, etc., to determine things, as opposed to, it doesn't really do that in an Eastern RPG. You sort of mostly just, all of your stats take place in the battle screen. So now that I've given that brief introduction to Eastern versus Western style RPGs and what that kind of entails, the biggest thing you're going to want to know for both the sneak events and the battle events is how to calculate distance. Because, for example, if you have a person right here, and let's say your character is right here, that's 3 squares away. And maybe they're right here, which is even farther, and you want to make it so it's harder to detect them from that far. Or, they're right here. So how do you detect the distance from here to here? Well, RPG Maker has this cool thing where if you go into control variables, and here's all the variables I have so far. That's a lot. And this is just for character creation and battle and sneaking. So you can go in here and make the variable, go into game data and character, and you can do the player or the event, the guard or monster or whatever. You can make it the map X coordinate and the map Y coordinate. So you're going to want to do 4 variables, the X and the Y for the player and the X and the Y for the event. And then what you do is I'm going to just make the assumption that maybe none of you remember high school algebra, because it's been years, you maybe never used it, and maybe you do remember, but for those that might not, let's do some review. So on a right triangle, meaning a triangle that has a 90-degree angle, the longest side is called the hypotenuse. And the Greeks, thousands of years ago, specifically a guy named Pythagoras, found out that to find this side, you can take one of the sides and square that side, and then take another side and square that side, and then add them together, and you get the squared of this side. So these two things, so you'll have to take whatever answer you get and square root it. Now, that particular step serves us no purpose in RPG Maker. One, because it would take a really probably programmed event in itself to find a square root, something that's much more complicated than it needs to be. Plus the fact that one of the drawbacks towards the math that's done in the variable system is that it doesn't use decimals. It rounds to the nearest whole number. I believe it rounds up in each case, but I could be wrong. Either way, it rounds. So when you're trying to find distances, that can really skew it, and we don't want to do that. So it's okay to just leave it in the squared form. Just keep in mind, for example, that if you want to find a distance of 5, the number you're going to want to end up with is going to be 25. So how that works with RPG Maker is if you take a coordinate system, and say you have a point right here on x is -3 and y is 3, and then you have another point on x is 1 and y is 0, and you want to find the distance. Well, first you start off with y, the vertical component, and you subtract the second y from that y. So 3 minus 0 is 3. And if you look at this, basically the y component is 3 long. Then you square that and you get 9. And then you take the x component, the horizontal component, and you have to start with the same x as you did the y. So if you started with this y, start with this x. So negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4. And as you can see, this is 4 units long. But wait, it's a negative number. But it doesn't matter because it's an absolute value term. So if you square it, you end up with a positive number. So 9 plus 16 is 25. If we were to take the square root of that, we'd find that this length is 5. But, like we said, we can't do the square roots. Well, we could have this one, and it's easy, but if you needed to do like the square root of 26, it ends up being a decimal number. So, in here, I have a common event that finds those two distances. You take the x component of the player and the y component of the player. Same thing for the events. Take the distance, and I'd make the distance, x distance, equal to the event, and then subtract the x distance of the player. Then multiply that by itself. Then take the x distance of, or the y component of the event, and make sure if you started with the event in x, start with it in y. You can start with player, but just make sure you go in the same order each time. Then subtract the player's coordinate and multiply it by itself. So then you have the distance of the x unit, the horizontal unit, and you have the distance of the y unit. Something to keep in mind is normal coordinate systems start with this is the origin. So this is line 0, or would be line 0, and this would be line 0. And this would be 1, 0, and this would be 0, 1. RPG Maker, for whatever reason, has the origin right here. So this is the positive x direction still, but then this is the positive y direction still. Something to remember when you're making these things, because it can mess you up when you want to program in directions, which you're going to use for the battle and the sneak. Because, you know, if you have somebody, say, facing away from your character, you want to have them make it so it's harder for them to detect your character. So once you've done that, that allows you, those distance formulas by themselves will allow you to find the distance of a straight line. For example, you can use just the distance of x to find the distance from here to here. So if the player and the event are on a straight line across from each other, however, if they're diagonal, what you're going to want to do is take those two, you're going to want to create a third variable. You can call it diagonal distance. I call it the polar distance. It's a math term, but you can call it diagonal distance. So you take that x length and that y length and add them together, and that creates the polar length. So for something to remember is, so from here to here, that's a distance of 1. From here to here is a distance of 1. From here to here is not a distance of 1. This is actually, now if you remember right, so 1 squared is 1, 1 squared is 1, and 1 plus 1 is 2. So this is a diagonal distance of 2. It's a real distance of square root of 2, but remember, we're not doing the square roots. So the diagonal distance is actually in this same little corner area is twice what the linear distance is. So this is a distance of 2. The straight shot diagonal is going to be a diagonal distance of 4 before taking the square root. And it's a little bit more complicated if you were, say, had the person here and the person here. But what you keep in mind is if, say, you have somebody here and you want to make sure that anything happens within a distance of 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, make your diagonal distance equal 25, and then that 5 becomes a radius of a circle that's 5 units all around it. So maybe this will end up like right here, right here, right here, you know, however the math ends up winding up. But it does a pretty good job of having a radius of 5 around the whole thing. So that is the first video I wanted of the introduction to the Western RPG, as well as a review of the Pythagorean theorem to use a distance formula. Go ahead and like this video, subscribe, and we'll see you again next time when we go over character creation and customization. Thank you very much.